I think the blessing of the three is having the confidence to go after something that I don't think I'm particularly good at, science is, but that three, like, cockiness where you're like, I can do anything. Like, like I don't think most people would go after a degree where they're like, I'm not good at this, but I'm going to go after it because I know if I work hard enough, it'll probably work out for me.
Welcome to another episode of What It's Like to Be You. I'm Josh Levine, your host. Today, my guest is Nancy Walter. And Nancy is a co-host on the Big Hormone Enneagram podcast, has been since the beginning. And she's also a self-pres social type 3 with a 4-wing, not 369 trifix. So very, very similar typing to me, with the exception that I'm social self-pres, and the order for me is 396. The order for Nancy is 369. This interview was fascinating on many levels. Nancy is, and actually I want to say this up front. This is not an episode to listen to with children, or if you are sensitive to content like suicidal ideation or severe mental health struggles or sexual topics like sugaring. Nancy has led a fascinating life, and she really struggled with a severe mental health condition for a really long time. And throughout her childhood, it was very confusing and very frustrating and led to some suicidal thoughts, which we explore, and a number of interesting later in life revelations about who she is, what she wants to be, that kind of make her a 3. But what's interesting about this interview is how, because of Nancy's mental health struggles, her story as a 3 is somewhat unstereotypic. And I really like exploring these kinds of unstereotypical stories that illuminate or help us get a little further closer into the core of what 3 really is. So we explore a lot of the similar 3 themes, like discovering who you really are, the importance of being good at something, feeling like you're good at something for 3s, the transition from needing to be good at something to just pursuing something because you love it, which is something that Nancy started to do in the last couple of years. It's very cool. And one thing to mention about this conversation is that we are catching Nancy at a moment where she's just 2 weeks after landing in the United States, having moved back from the Netherlands. She moved to the Netherlands to pursue graduate school, and also it was a big life vision dream of hers and her husband's to go live there. And it just didn't work out because of some logistical things and practical details and visa struggles and et cetera, et cetera. And that was a very painful thing to have to regroup. And so Nancy is a little bit licking her wounds and regrouping, and she now has a plan for what she's doing next. But here she is in this somewhat sensitive moment of reflection. So I really loved this conversation. Nancy's really funny. She's really saucy, and she kind of, she's really good at poking people, including me. And I just, from the point of view of exploring what 3 really is and contrasting my story as a 3 with her story as a 3, and these 3 themes of like fulfilling your potential, discovering who you really are, lighting the inner fire, all these things are really salient throughout her story. And I really think you'll enjoy this conversation. One final thing to mention is that Nancy's story pivots around a really important road trip that she took a few years ago in which she chose to live. So with that as context, here's Nancy. I want to talk about your road trip. But I want to talk about it first by setting it up. Like, can you tell us about what your childhood was like, and just being depressed for as long as you were? And then my understanding is that the road trip was the first time where you basically said, I am going to choose to actually live and participate here in this world. And it was a major life turning point for you. This is my understanding.
Yeah. So go ahead.
And one other thing I'll say is my sense from our last conversation is that you consider the mental health challenges that you've had in a totally separate category from the Enneagram.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I find that interesting, and the quality of your condition, or I want you to put your words to it, in relation to you being a 3. I'm interested in the intersection of that, if you have words for it. But
Yeah.
let's start with like being a kid and then going on the road trip.
Well, it all started on November 6th, 1995. Um, just kidding. So I'm not 100% sure how to contextualize this for you. I guess I can start by saying that I really struggled with mental health as a child.
Yeah. Since
Um,
when? Or how old
since
are you?
since when I was like, as far as I can remember, so since I was like 2.
Uh-huh.
Um, so it started with more anxiety symptoms
Mm-hmm.
and turned into depression pretty quickly. So I experienced depression as young as maybe 8, 9.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't, at that point, you don't know what's going on. You just, you know, think you're just sad.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, I think I struggled with it pretty much my whole life. For those out there that are interested, I would self-diagnose myself as on the autism spectrum, but
Mm-hmm.
I haven't been able to get a formal diagnosis
Okay.
for multiple reasons, but not the least of which it's expensive as fuck.
Mm-hmm.
But I was never tested as a child, so I just kind of raw dogged anxiety and depression as a kid. No medication, no therapy.
Uh-huh.
um, I don't know what to tell you. I grew up in the excuse me. I grew up in the Presbyterian church, so there was a lot of like pray away your feelings kind of thing, and if you
Oh yeah.
have any of these feelings, like you're not a good enough Christian kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. And that worked.
So,
That worked for you.
and oh yeah, I am cured. Actually,
Great.
I prayed once to God,
Okay.
and I was like, "Wow, I'm happy now. Nothing ever bothers me."
Yeah.
Um, yeah, when 10 out of 10 would totally recommend Christianity for mental health.
Mm.
Um, I actually, so here's a good little 3 story of like me being like a
Sure.
little like self-pres 3. I got caught smoking weed one time.
Mm-hmm. How old are
The
you?
devil, maybe 15.
Okay.
Um, not super young, but young enough. Um, stay away from drugs, kids. Anyway, so my parents sent me to a therapist, but it was a Christian therapist.
Okay.
I put on such a good show. Like, I, as a 15-year-old, knew that I was fucked up. Like, I was like, I am not right in the head. Something is wrong here. But I wasn't vulnerable enough to like tell anybody or show it. Like, nobody knew.
Oh, that's
Um,
good.
yeah. Like, a
Yeah.
couple people probably knew, but like, not really.
Uh-huh.
You know what I mean? Um,
Yep.
and so I went to this therapist and like I was talking to her and I was trying to be honest, but like I like couldn't be like vulnerable. Like when I would talk about my emotions as a child, like it was very like stilted. And I still get that way sometimes. Like I'll talk about my emotions as if they're over here.
Mm-hmm.
But it was worse as a kid. And so she like at the second or third session, she was like, Nancy, I don't even know why you're here. Like you don't have anything wrong with you. You're good to go. Like just don't come back. And I was like, looking back, I was so close to offing myself at that point.
Wow. Oh
Trigger
my
warning,
God.
sorry people, but like I think about that therapist so much. I don't remember her name. I don't remember what she looks like at all. But I'm like, ma'am, I was like ready to go. I was ready to go. And you were like,
Mm-hmm.
bye bye,
Mm-hmm.
lady. Um, so yeah,
When you
anyway.
say you were ready to go, I do actually want to get more texture on that. Like, um, what do you mean?
I mean, I was ready to like not
Yeah,
live anymore. I was ready to
that's
kill
right.
myself.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And you'd been having like suicidal ideation for a while, right? And
Yeah, probably
on
since I was
off.
12 or 13.
You're right, right, right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So most of my like teenagehood was heavy
Mhm.
ideation.
Sure.
Like I had a
Okay.
plan, written notes, whole 9 yards.
Mm-hmm.
So, and
Mm-hmm.
I was like close to peak like depression when she when when the lady sent me out of her office.
That is amazing. And
I
so
know.
you, so do you remember your motive, or like what was going through your head in that session or in those sessions
I
with
was
her? Yeah.
I was really insulted. I don't know why insulted was what I felt,
Mm-hmm.
but and so anybody who's struggled with mental health probably knows like it's a like remembering your childhood's a bit like looking into fog. Like I
Yes, sure.
remember bits and pieces, but I don't really remember it.
Uh-huh.
So just keep that in mind when I'm talking. Timelines are really mixed up.
Okay.
I don't have full memory of it, but um yeah, I was really insulted. I felt really hurt because and I felt like I couldn't be helped because it was like the one chance I felt like I had at really getting help because I knew I needed help, but I didn't know how to ask. And I was like,
Mm.
"Oh, thank God, like someone's going to see through this." And she didn't.
Ah, okay.
And I was like, "Oh, so like it's my fault that people aren't seeing through this." And as a 15-year-old, how what do you do with that information? Like, you can't be like, why do I block out my like you need someone with you for that
S-
experience. Like,
So let me just get it right. And I understand that the memory is a little foggy, but so it's kind of like there you are in a therapy session when you're really young. You are really depressed. You're aware that you're depressed. You're aware that you are, in your words, like really fucked up. And you go to a therapist and put on a show that presents as like the picture of health.
pretty much.
And and she's like, "Oh, you're great. Like no problem. See you later."
Mhm.
And that is the thing that insults you, like because she just didn't like it's almost like you were testing the therapist in a certain way, like does she pass the test of seeing through my presentation? Not that that was a conscious motive, but like the fact that she didn't was a disappointment to you.
Yeah. Yeah, it was
Yeah.
a bit like a test. It was a bit like a
Mhm.
test because um it's interesting you say that because I think the people who like had really like I had like latched onto in my like there were a couple friends that I had that I knew how bad it was or close to how bad it was.
Mhm.
And they could figure it out pretty quick upon meeting me. But it was probably because they were also depressed. So they were probably like, it clocked me. Right.
Mhm. Mhm.
So I guess it was a bit of a test of like, how do you see this? Do you see what's going on? Because if you don't, I don't think you can be here with me.
Amazing. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm just it's where my mind is going is thinking about my experience in therapy once, which I'm happy to share that, but later.
Yes.
Um, and also a recent client that I met, or potential client that I met, who was like very obviously a three right away. And the over the course of our conversation, I mean, he presented with this just absolute I don't want to reveal any details about him. But he presented in like kind of like
Like
you
he's
said,
got
like
it covered.
he's got it covered. Like
Yeah.
he really wants a coach, but also
Don't
this is
really
all the
need
stuff that
one.
he's doing, and
Right.
he's like thought about all these things, and these are the books he's read and stuff like that. And there was a way that there's there was this. It felt like he was negotiating, um, trying to hold together both the desire for a coach and the fact that he's got it all together at the same time.
Yeah. No, I'm very
Um,
familiar with that feeling.
yeah. um, yeah. Likewise.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so okay. So there you are, back to your 15-year-old self.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, I don't really know where I was going with that. I think it was just a funny story.
Yeah.
Um, or
Well, but so I think the place to go is so you were 15, you had this moment that was like the one possible lifeline that was that basically didn't work out.
right.
And so you stayed depressed. You chose not to off yourself, and you're still here. And
Yep.
you are maybe like to the extent that it's possible, given your memory, like just very brief kind of spark notes from like 15 to um, the moment of just of choosing to go on the road trip and choosing to live.
As far as like mental health, or as far as what I did?
As far as, let me say it this way. What I am curious about is there's something about your road trip that feels like poetic, cinematic, um, redemptive, and it feels, I if I were to put it on the Enneagram, it feels 3-ish. I don't know why yet, but it just has the feeling to me.
Very
And
self-pres 3 specifically.
it reminds me of moments in my life, like, well, for example, last year I spent um in 2 different stints, a total of 5 months in a cabin in the woods by myself, and it was the happiest I've ever been, and it was just absolutely rejuvenating, and it decalcified all of my patterns, and it purged all of the things that had influenced me, not all of them. But it was just
You are healed. You are
yeah.
100%
But
done.
it was the first time I really experienced myself on my own, doing my own thing without
Mhm.
the pressures of anything or anyone else on me, and it was absolutely revitalizing and rejuvenating. Um and it kind of like woke up my joy again. And it sounds to me like your road trip was a similar experience for you and helped you come back to life. And I'm curious about your experience of that as a 3,
Mm.
um, if that's the right framing for you.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So part of what I'll talk about is, whether or not you believe in medium bullshit. One explanation I got for like when like what I call like the fog kind of lifted
Hmm.
in my life, I apparently, according to a medium, had like a out basically in like at like 16, which tracks
Okay.
for like when I was um like had a gun in gun in my hand ready to shoot myself.
Hmm.
Um so that tracks. I had an out and I chose not to take it. And
Hmm.
so my life up until that point was very much like I am only living to here, and it didn't feel like living. And then after that was kind of that door closing, and
Hmm.
almost like a rebirth, for lack of a better term, of like, oh, I'm here now. This is where I'll be for a while, however long it is. Um, Now what? Kind of thing. So I was still extremely depressed. Like my mental illness didn't go away. Um, but
Hmm.
just the feeling of not being meant to be here was gone. Um, so as that door was closing from like 16 to 21 was kind of when I was experiencing a little bit of living. And I did that through, so I didn't like, I graduated high school. I was a really low grade student because mental health. Um, and I didn't go to college because I didn't know what I wanted to do, because I just realized that I was going to be on this earth. So I
Hmm.
had never made a plan to make it to 18. So
I see. Yep.
yeah, there was no dreams. There were no dreams
Right.
to live. So I was like, I don't know what to do. So I got like recruited by a sales agency and went full 3 because I'd never like,
Oh yeah, this is good. Yeah, let's go
yeah.
there. Yeah, yeah. Uh
I am personally, I feel personally attacked by my own younger self with this story. Um,
huh. Okay.
like I dislike it so much. But anyway, um, so like I got recruited by a sales agency when I was like 18, 17 or 18 to sell Cutco knives,
Hmm.
and I was really good at it.
This is like door to door knife salesmanship.
Pretty much, yeah, cold
Yeah.
calling and sales of cutlery.
Uh huh.
Um, and I was pretty good at it. So I liked it because it was instant gratification of that self-pres 3, right? Like you sell something, you make money, you are successful.
Hmm.
And it's like boom boom boom,
Yeah.
serotonin or
Yeah.
whatever, like success.
Hmm.
And so that's when like my self-pres 3 kind of kicked in and was like, oh, we've never done this before. Like, what's this?
Yeah.
So, it was kind of a way that I could succeed outside of the like school setting. So I just took it and ran with it, and I did all of it. I did like the sales rep job. I did assistant manager. I owned an office for like 2 years. I moved around. I like went to all the conferences. I did all of it, and was really good at it. And I worked like 7 days a week. Didn't have a life. It was my life. Like I was
Wow.
full cult shit in it.
Yeah.
Um, and you know while I was being it's a district manager, it's where you own an office. I was in Fredericksburg. um I had been neglecting like my physical health, as threes often do, but I think it caught up to me faster. I think probably because I have like mental health issues that I had never dealt with, so my body was already kind of teetering on the edge of being okay. um
Hmm.
So I got really sick. I had like chronic tonsillitis for like a year, and like I couldn't like eat. I was losing weight. Like it was just really like it was no one illness. It was just sort of like my body just breaking down.
Okay.
Um, so I ended up having to quit, um, and realizing that was kind of when like it hit me that I cannot push myself quite to the extent that other people can. Because I saw a lot of people, and maybe, it was probably a little bit of the cult vibe coming in where they don't tell you what's really going on behind the scenes, but it felt like everyone else was like not struggling to the level that I struggled.
Hmm.
Um,
And to be fair,
and
you were working 7 days a week, and that was your whole life, right? So
right, right, right. But,
yeah. Okay.
as a three, that's nothing. Um,
Okay.
so, yeah, so I was like, it felt, like I couldn't push myself to the extent that everyone else was. So I ended up quitting because I couldn't hold their expectations, which nobody should. Um, like, they were too high. Um, and I ended up moving back in with my parents,
And
and
how old are you at this point?
21 or 22,
Right.
somewhere in
Okay.
there.
Okay.
I think 22. Um, so I ended up moving back in with my parents, didn't have a job, ended up finding a job through my brother, which was like desk work at a gun store, which is like, if you know me, is really not my vibe. Like, but it was work, so that's what I
Wow.
did.
Also, I mean, it just really like, is that where you put your family member who's been struggling with suicidal ideation? Just that's pretty interesting to me.
Dude,
Yeah.
no. But at that point I wasn't struggling with suicidal ideation.
Oh, that's good. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. So I was still struggling with depression very,
I
very
see.
much. But
Okay.
yeah, not. Um Also, no one in my family like believes or knows that really. Like they just act like it never happened. Um
Oh, interesting. Okay.
yeah, yeah, it's a fun one. Um so no, it's not where you put people who are struggling with suicidal ideation, but
Mm-hmm.
um yeah, so I got a job there, worked there, and that's when I started sugaring as well.
Okay.
So I moved out of my parents' house.
Let me stop you for 1 second. So, because
Yes.
the sugaring thing is going to be a whole other chapter, but the it really strikes me that having having lived your life up to 16, 17 in the state that you were in, that the opportunity to sell knives was kind of the lifeline that you as a three actually needed because and I know that we could make fun of it in all kinds of ways
Sure.
in terms of
Sure.
how it's you being a three, but it sounds like it actually gave you an identity and a sense of actuated self-worth that you hadn't experienced before.
Yeah, I think it like showed me that I had energy and passion.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And granted, it was for selling knives, which maybe you're not actually passionate about, but
Yeah.
like it was for it was a thing that lit you up and that you
Hmm.
were good at and that you got to experience yourself being good at.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that seems like a really important thing. And one of the things that really strikes me too is comparing. This is why, um, given your mental health history, like your story as a 3 defies certain stereotypes. Um, my story as a 3 is what's that face you made?
I shook the table.
Oh, got it. Okay, you're fine.
I was like,
Um,
oh no.
so like when I was a kid, I went to a very small high school with 39 kids in my graduating class, and it was, I don't mean anything in particular by this, but like it was easy for me to do very well in school, and I was in
Sure.
like every sports thing, and I was in every theater production, and I was like Mr. 3.
Right.
And I had an incredible time in high school. And then my depression didn't really start until college, because when I went to Princeton, I had to confront uh, um, my mediocrity relative to my peers, and also I relate to a lot of the things that you said about I can't show that I'm struggling
Hmm.
because A players don't show that they're struggling. A players don't struggle. I couldn't accept into my self image that I was struggling, actually,
Yeah.
and so was trying to be I was trying to be in theater productions and dance companies and an a cappella group and in the hardest possible physics classes and going out every night.
Oh my
And it was just too much.
It sounds
And
exhausting.
so my depression started as a result of that. But I had, and this is the point I'm trying to make, I had the reference experience prior to that of feeling like alive and that people loved me and that I was like, on fire in high school.
You
And
had
then
success.
yeah, exactly. And so the contrast that I experienced in college was, what sent me into a tailspin in terms of mental health as a 3. And so I tie, like, my mental health experience is like basically textbook 3s going down the levels of health. Um, but your mental health experience doesn't really feel that way. It feels like it was just this other dimension or like biochemical thing that prevented you from, in a sense, being a 3 or like doing what 3s do when they're young. But then here you are and you get this opportunity to sell knives, and then you got to experience that. And so it was a
Hmm.
kind of like lifeline and lifted you out of it. And
Yeah.
then so you found yourself back at your parents' place, and so I imagine that was, I don't know, depressing, or it was certainly a contrast, or I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Um.
Yeah, what was that like?
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit hard to say because that's one of those periods where it's really, really foggy to me,
Okay.
because I was so physically ill.
Right, you were deteriorating, yeah.
Yeah, so
Okay.
yeah, it's a bit hard to remember, but I do remember that um like this is when I kind of found like that anger fuels is a great fuel, like
Okay.
when you can't find energy. Um so like I was really mad at my situation. And it was one of the first times that my well not well one of the first times I can remember of like my anger not being linked to my depression, in the sense that like I get angry and then I get really like depressed. I was
Mhm.
just angry
Mhm.
because I had been if you know being a woman in any like sales vibe place, you're going to experience a lot of sexism, and there was a lot of sexism and a lot of assaults that happened, and a lot of being overlooked for positions, and just a lot of things that had happened
Mhm.
in those 3 or 4 years that I had been in the vector marketing, which is the name of it,
Mhm.
um, that I was kind of coming to terms with. And like there was like one specific line which I've told the Big Hormone Enneagram podcast, but really stuck with me, which was my boss telling me right before I quit, Nancy, if you want to be respected like a man, you need to work like one. Um, and
Mhm.
that was like one of those moments that I was like, well, fuck you. Um, and
Mhm.
that's, I quit immediately upon that statement.
Okay.
And so I was still really reeling from like that. So there was
Wow.
a lot of pick yourself up, dust yourself off. We're going to like do something better
Okay.
because I was pissed. So,
So in a certain sense, from an inner point of view, um, you experienced leaving selling not as a failure, but as a
right.
kind of rebellion against a sexist workplace, and also a moment of self care because your body was deteriorating. So
Yeah.
the anger kind of propelled you forward. It wasn't like it wasn't, you didn't have to confront like another ego death.
No, no, it
Yeah.
definitely was not an ego death. Is very much a, you know, I'm I'm going to prove you wrong and I'm going to go do something I want to do.
Yeah.
And that's probably what fueled me planning this road trip. Um,
Okay.
and uh, so the job was not making me enough money. So that's why I started sugaring to make
Okay.
money for this road trip.
Oh,
Um,
I see. Okay.
yeah, yeah. Um, so that period of my life was really like very finding myself in feminism, getting away from the church, turning away from like the Republican Party, really finding like my political stances and that kind of stuff. So like I
Hmm.
cut off all my hair. I you know, broke up with a boyfriend that was like not supportive. Like I did all these things that were very much like a fuck you. I'm going to do this myself now.
Hmm.
Um so like I kind of had my three awakening that gave me success and energy. I realized that I was not that. And then I started working towards something that I wanted to actually be,
Hmm.
which I've always loved hiking. I've always loved the outdoors. I grew up like hiking around the woods behind my parents' house. Like that's all I did as a kid. Um, so I was like, started hiking a lot more because I was working kind of weird hours. So I always had like Tuesdays off. So I'd go hiking on Tuesdays and like no one's up on the mountain on Tuesdays, which is wonderful. So I got to spend a lot of time doing that. Learned a lot about camping, hiking, safety, got gear, um, and kind of like gathered my resources and started planning this trip to really like try myself out, I
Hmm.
guess.
Yeah. So
So
the sugaring thing, that was a a a means to an end.
to an extent.
And can you talk about your I know that you mentioned in our last conversation that sugaring was another period of life where your threeness really showed up.
Hmm.
So yeah, I'm curious to hear you talk about that. And I have one other question. See if you can weave this in. Can you talk about what it was like sugaring in the context of having your political feminist awakening?
It's so fun. Um, it's such a party. Um, Honestly, I really enjoyed sugaring. It was very fun.
Okay.
90% of the time. There's obviously the 10% that's like, you know, people don't pay you and shit like that.
Hmm.
Um, but 90% of the time it's very fun. So, um, what did you? I lost my train of thought for a second.
I asked about your experience sugaring and how you said that it was a period of time
Oh,
where
that's
it
right. It was
activated your
threeness.
threeness. Yeah.
Right, right, right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Um, so, um, let's see. So it kind of started. Okay. Um, when working in this gun store, I worked around a lot of older men who are probably a little creepy. Whatever. Um, and by probably, I mean they really are. They
Hmm.
liked young women. So, um, but I realized I was really good at making them like me. Even though I had really short hair and I was not like their stereotypically pretty lady, they thought it was like a fun time to banter with me. And The hilarious part of old white men is you can insult them and they think it's so funny because they don't think you're serious ever.
Okay. Okay.
So, like, most of my banter was just me being really insulting to people, and they thought it was hilarious. So, like, there was one customer who like really liked me. He was going through a divorce, and he was like just an older dude, just like struggling, and he liked me enough. He started like buying stuff for me. So he started like, I wanted a pistol for my house in Richmond because
Mhm.
Richmond City is not the safest. So
Mhm.
and I grew up with guns, obviously, so I like feel somewhat comfortable with them being in my house
Mhm.
now.
Mhm.
Um so he bought me like a gun. He would take me to the shooting range. He would take me hunting, which I'm not a huge fan of hunting, but it's
Mhm.
entertaining
Mhm.
to sit in a tree stand and watch nature and not shoot things. So like he started doing all that, and I was like, oh, this is kind of, I'm pretty good at this. Um, and so I had a friend who was
Good
also
at specifically
making
charm.
old
Yeah.
white men pay me.
Uh-huh. Okay. Uh-huh.
So I had a friend who was in it, and she showed me like how to work the website, like what to put on it, what to check for, all that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
Um, which I would highly recommend if you're going to get into it, especially now. You probably want to find someone who's already in it to help you.
Uh-huh.
If you have any questions, feel free to send them my way
This is
because
a Yeah, go ahead.
yeah,
Three
I don't.
competence coming out. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
I know. Like, I really, it's not the safest. So, if there are any people
Mhm.
looking to start this, like, please ask any questions you have. So that's what she did for me. So, I got my profile set up. The first guy didn't really want to pay me. Like, he wanted to just give me gifts, which is like not helpful. Um, so that was fine. But like, what I found out I was really good at was specifically like short, older white men and like kink. And they love that because I would just
Mhm.
be like a little rude brat to them. And they were like, here's my money. They just loved it. So I could put on a face for 3-4 hours, make them really, really happy.
Mhm.
Like, not just sexually, like, I could just, like, they could talk about their lives to me. They could, because most of them are like struggling in some emotional way. Like,
Mhm.
this is a space for them to, get something out of it
Mhm.
um, that they don't have back at home. So I would offer that space to them, and they really enjoyed it. And I was really good at like listening and holding space for them and creating whatever person they wanted to be with
Mhm.
that day. And I actually made like one good friend out of it. He's actually very nice guy. Like we ended up hanging out for a couple years after that, not as like a arrangement or dating, just hanging out. So, um, but he was one of the few that I was actually like myself with, but he was also like a normal person. All the rest of them were very much like really troubled men who needed a certain person. So I was able to like create that for them, be that for them, and then leave. It was like the perfect resetting, right? I can be very one dimensional. Nobody expects me to be anything other than one dimensional. Make money, go home.
Mhm.
And I have a high sex drive anyway, so it works,
Mhm.
you know. Um so yeah, that was kind of like how I
Yeah.
expelled the threeness.
Do you have, or at the time did you have any, how do I want to put this question? Like, were you aware of the way that you were adapting and
Hmm.
m- becoming another person
Yes, I was
for the
very
certain,
aware of it.
right?
And I
And
took
yeah.
great joy in it. It
Yeah,
was a
that's
lot of
actually what
fun.
I'm tuning into, is that is really interesting to me, is that you
Hmm.
took joy in it.
Yeah.
Because why? Because it was something that you knew that it was another thing that you were good at.
It was another thing that I was good at, and it was simple.
Okay.
Is is very easy. Like, I don't think I could do that now, to be honest, because I've kind of integrated the multiple parts of myself. So, like, I can't just be one dimensional anymore. But in that time, I hadn't. So, it was a part of me that I hadn't integrated that I could just fully be for like 3 or 4 hours and get paid to be.
Cool.
Um, so yeah, it was kind of a person that I wasn't allowed to be in normal life, that I
Uh huh.
hadn't integrated into my life.
Oh, like what? What does that mean? Like what aspects or facets of you?
Um, like my pretty like aggressive towards men, like kind of hateful, kind of rude, kind of bitchy personality, like
Uh
my
huh.
darker personality or whatever.
Sure.
Um, like if you watch like how what am I trying to say? My style like shifted. Like if you could watch me as my style shifts through that, you could see me like integrating that part of me, like my sexy, sexual, whatever side, non
Yeah.
binary shit. All that was very in a corner.
Mm-hmm.
And I was in a very Republican setting at work. Um, so like still kind of coming out of the church, hadn't like accepted that I was like bi, hadn't really accepted that I wasn't super gender conforming. So like all of my experiments I could kind of put in that corner and I could bring out for certain men because certain men like certain things and most of those I had and I hadn't tried them on yet. So it allowed me to try everything on and see what I wanted to keep.
That is amazing.
Hmm.
I am super struck by, let's see, two things. So the first is how you created the situation for yourself where you got to experiment with different, bringing out different previously concealed aspects of your personality, and find places where not only did you get to experiment with them, but you found places where they were welcome,
Hmm.
and over time got to integrate things that you had been hiding into your actual identity.
Yes.
Two is how I think it would be not so far a stretch to say that, um, the a typical reaction to sugaring, um, for people who don't really know what it is or have spoken to a person who's actually done it, um, feels like it contradicts a certain ethos of feminism.
Mm, yeah.
And what's interesting to me about your experience is that you actually were discovering yourself as a feminist and kind of inhabiting and embodying and manifesting certain personality traits that are, um, authentic to you as a feminist in that context and kind of locking them in as foundations of your selfhood. Um, and I just think it's amazing that that was that was the framing and the context in which you did that.
Hmm. Yeah. Um, Yeah, I guess I'm lucky that I got to experiment and get paid to experiment.
Yeah,
I don't think many
it's
people get that opportunity.
that's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
The other thing I will say is just from a three point of view is that it really does feel to me like it's so important for young threes to feel good at something.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so you found not so you had your first experience of that with the knives and the selling, and you had your second experience of that in this context of sugaring. And it seems to me like both of them gave you gave you a sense of confidence that the rest of your life didn't really give you an opportunity to grow.
Yes. Yeah, and I think one thing after that happened after the sales job was I was really afraid to do something that I was that good at um
Hmm.
as a job, as a full-time job.
Hmm.
because as threes know, it's very easy to allow that to take over your life. So
Mhm.
I think that it was an interesting time where I was able to try doing like side stuff, like side hobbies that I was good at, that I enjoyed, I happened to make money at,
Mhm.
um, and not let it take over my life and have that three be like sustained and happy, because I think it is extremely important for threes to be good at stuff, to be doing something that they feel they're good at.
Mhm.
Um, uh, but not have it be my entire life. So not letting the three take me over.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you experience that at all in the context of sugaring? The takeover?
No, because it was
Okay.
very, very, like I said, one dimensional. Is I was one person for an evening, um, and you can't really extend that into a real human life, I guess, or I couldn't.
I see. So, yeah. I think originally when because we hadn't actually unpacked this yet, but when you
Hmm.
talked about sugaring and you said that it was another place where you were like an Uber 3, um, I thought where you were going to go with it was that you applied yourself with the same kind of intensity
Oh no,
um, as you did in the knives. And it sounds like it's a totally different thing.
no, totally
Um, yeah. So you had these like time boxed scenarios where you got to experiment with your identity.
different. Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and that's I think what's helped me be such a integrated Bermuda 3. Even though I'm not, highly integrated, I'm more integrated than I was before. So,
Mhm.
yeah.
So, okay. So then you went on the road trip and then you had what kind of an experience was it? Yeah, go
Um,
ahead.
yeah, so I went on the road trip, and it was the first time that I had been that alone without expectations, right? Like I had or I'd worked alone and like lived with roommates, but like I still had expectations. Like I had to show up to work, I had to do, life things. But this was my first time where I was able to just do anything I wanted to, go anywhere. Um, I had my dog with me. He was a puppy at the time. And so it was just me and him. It was my job to take care of him. And um, it was a very like, I feel like a lot of people probably view it as like a, like you mentioned, cinematic. It was just a lot of me crying. A
Uh-huh.
lot of crying.
Yeah.
A lot of like being like realizing that things don't look or are things aren't the way you expect them to be a lot of the time. Because you go to these beautiful places and like it's just a place and you're just
Mhm.
a person in a place experiencing life in a different place.
Mhm.
It's like, um, so it kind of showed me like how normal things are, I guess, everywhere. And um showed me how like human I was, and it really allowed me to just like be sad. And like I definitely grieved, like got a lot of my grieving done alone,
Yeah.
um as a three does best. And I think I grieved like a lot of my childhood and
Uh-huh.
all that, like, just the things that I feel like I missed out on. um
Yeah.
and kind of reconciling like that this mental illness I have is probably going to be forever, and that's just how it's going to be. And like coming to terms with that, and coming to terms with like capitalism is going to run my life, and like just a lot of like dealing with the weight of the world in a way that wasn't, I'm depressed, I'm going to kill myself.
Mhm.
It's like actually dealing with it. Yeah.
Yeah. Um I mean, coming to a place of acceptance instead of fighting your
Yeah.
circumstances. Yeah. And There's something I'm like wanting to make a 3 connection about that. It feels like it's there, but I'm not finding it. Um,
Well, as a self-pres 3, I think it's important that there's always that like especially self-pres 3 specifically. There's always that longing for home, that longing
oh,
for a
good.
home
Yeah,
that
yeah.
you've never had.
Mm,
Um, and that's really just a self-pres thing. And I think it's important for self-pres 3s to like go try and find it because it leads you eventually back to yourself
mhm.
because there isn't really a home that you are missing. You
Yeah.
just it's just that grief, that self-pres grief that's just always there.
Uh-huh.
So, and I think it's also important for threes to spend time alone
I agree with that.
without any expectations because you aren't gonna I feel like young threes are not going to learn how to be themselves until they are alone and find themselves in their silence. And then they can start integrating it into real life with other people.
Although, you know what's amazing to me though about your experience sugaring is that, in contrast to what you're saying, is that, and this actually is sort of philosophically challenging for the way we conceive of 3,
Mhm.
is like, excuse me, the way that you were finding yourself through these, what you would call like, um, performative relationships. And so there's something about, like, that was an essential aspect of your journey of individuation.
Mhm.
And what someone would be very tempted to do is talk about, oh, well, like you were just being a different person with every person. That's like classic 3 chameleonic thing. But it seems to me there's something much deeper going on there. So you had that experience and then integrated um, aspects of yourself that you hadn't been able to integrate before. And then you had this experience of being able to grieve a lost childhood. After having done that, feels like that sequence kind of couldn't have gone the other way.
Yeah. Well, I think it's also I p- I picked out what I wanted to keep when I was sugaring.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was able to actually, like, I don't know, for some reason, I'm thinking of it in terms of like a wardrobe. Like, I picked out the outfits that I wanted to like add to the wardrobe and then I integrated it into it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and, um, yeah,
And also, I
there's some
think
things
just
there.
you're pretty saucy as a person. You know what I mean? Like, um,
Thank you.
yeah. I mean, was that a thing that was true of you before you did sugaring?
Um, no. Well, kind of, but like it was very like in a box.
Amazing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it came out like it got me in a lot of trouble. Like, like it was not integrated healthily.
Mm.
So I would like
Mm.
date people who were not healthy for me because I was like, ooh, they're bad, and like I'm a little bad, and like nobody knows.
Well,
That
I'm
kind
also just talking about like your sense of humor. I mean, you're like, you poke people,
yeah,
and you
yeah, I do.
and you have this kind of like sometimes blasé, like, um, making fun of or dismissing people, but in a way that is actually kind of seeing them.
Mhm, mhm.
Um, yeah, like you do it
Yeah.
a lot too. I mean, everyone on the podcast um and me before this
Yeah.
call. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm good at it.
Yeah, you are. So that's a thing too. And that's an amazing, just that statement right there. Like you're good at it. I mean, I think that's, in a certain sense, that's been the through line of your story of not, I don't want to overstate, like I was going
Sure.
to use the word healing from mental health, but it seems to me it's apropos, but it's not complete necessarily, but the sense
Sure.
of your individuating and like coming back to life rode the feeling, or like what you kept following your nose, like what am I good at, what am I good at,
Right.
and that
Right.
helped you constellate your sense of who you are. um and then having constellated that, you were able to grieve all this time where you didn't have that. um and Not that you're not still discovering, but that seems to me the right way to put it.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think, yeah, following my nose was a good way to put it. It's sort of um, like my threeness was kind of shortened a little because of like my mental illness as a child.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of had to like fast track
Mm-hmm.
figuring out what I was good at. Whereas like most three children probably know to an extent what they're good at. They may not know themselves, but they know what they're good at. Um, so yeah, I think it was a lot of like in my early 20s, late teens, finding that,
Mm-hmm.
being like, oh, that worked. Oh, that worked. And
Yeah.
just, yeah.
Yeah. Is there anything now? Actually, yeah, I do want to ask this question. I'm curious about. There's a bit of a fork in the road. I'm curious about your time after the road trip, your experience um, on the podcast, your kind of professional trajectory, and how that is like a continuation of your choosing to live and wanting to do things that you love, and I'm curious if there's a moment after which for you your identity stops being anchored to I'm good at this and starts being anchored to I like this or I want this, irrespective of being good at it, just because it's coming from some other inner place.
Hmm.
And one prompt is around like your choice of school or grads. I mean, your choice of topic to study. I'm curious
Mm-hmm.
about that too. Yeah. So that as a whole, that's the menu.
Okay. Oh no, there are too many things. Okay. I feel like I need this narrowed down. I
Yeah.
am a
Let's
bit
narrow it down.
confused.
Can you talk about? Let's start here. Can you talk about your journey after the road trip? Um, actually, yeah. Let's do it this way. One of the things that I found kind of funny about our first conversation was how much I was struck by like you're a 3, you're on an Enneagram podcast. It has nothing to do with your profession or your work.
Correct.
Um, and you even kind of took time away from it while you were like figuring shit out in the Netherlands, and are back. And there's this like hobby thing that you hold with the Enneagram. I'm curious, like what you like about the Enneagram, how it touches you, what is interesting to you about it, and it's so funny. I ask these compound questions. Okay, actually, let's put that one aside. This is what I actually want to ask: is can you talk about? Can you
You're a
talk about?
Bermuda, right?
I am a Bermuda. Yes,
Okay,
is
no,
it
this
showing?
this tracks. Two
Yeah.
Bermudas on a call. Let's go.
Um, what I actually want to ask is, can you talk about how you've chosen your life path forward after the road trip?
Okay. Well, I feel like a pattern in my life is it doesn't always feel like I'm choosing it. It just sort of feels like it falls into my lap, which I think a lot of threes can relate to.
Mm.
Things just sort
Bermuda
of,
threes for sure.
yeah, yeah. Things
Mm-hmm.
just sort of happen to us,
Mm-hmm.
and we're just like, oh, that's a pleasant coinky dink.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so like when I got back, I like just a kind of a brief interlude of like how my professional life got started. I met a person in a friend group, in a specifically an ultimate frisbee friend group.
Nice.
Um, yeah, who was like, "Hey, I think you'd be great helping me with my startup. Like, I think you have this Enneagram." At that point, I was kind of touting my Enneagram experience. So he was like, I think you'd be great using that Enneagram experience to help us like navigate having a startup with HR and like because if you know anything about startups, like it's very high tension. So kind of helping them through that.
Mm-hmm.
I ended up helping them working for them for, I don't know, like 6 months or something. Because big shocker, it didn't work out. Most startups don't. But I ended up doing like a lot of HR stuff with them. So like writing contracts and very paperworky kind of vibe. And I had learned in the desk job at the gun store that I really liked working with like very detailed paperwork. Like I like that kind of boring shit.
Mhm.
Don't know why. I just like it. And so I kind of got to like see how that worked in a professional setting and really kind of like procure my professional aura, if you will.
Mhm.
So like, kind of find my three face to put on that's not like too different from myself, but cleaner.
Mhm.
Um and that shut down. I ended up going through a staffing agency. They staffed me at a title company, and that's kind of how I got started in title work. Which, for those of you who don't know, when you buy a house, there's a lot of shit that goes on behind the scenes. Title companies basically prove chain of title is clear, so prove that everybody has owned the house legally up until this point, and that way we can actually insure the sale, to put it simply.
Okay.
So it's a lot of really, really legalese, really boring, behind the scenes paperwork, to put it bluntly. I mean, so I stayed with that company for a while. I don't know, like a year and a half, close to 2 years.
Mhm.
And then like moved up in like different title agencies. Because once you get into title, you're pretty sought after because it's not a job that most people want to do. So um, it's easy to find a job.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's kind of how my like career in that started, I guess.
Okay.
Um,
And then how did you choose to go to school?
oh, so I went back to therapy when I was like 22. And I went to about 3 years of therapy. And my last couple of months of therapy were me coming to terms with the fact that I actually really wanted to do school because I was a really bad student in high school. I was like D's get degrees level. Like literally my GPA from high school was like a 1.06. Like it was bad. It was bad. Um, so I was like coming to terms with the fact that I actually really enjoyed researching. Like that's kind of what
Mhm.
I found in these jobs. It's like I really like researching and like finding out new things and learning about these laws that are like buried deep within the bowels of the legal system. Like I just like, I think it's interesting.
Mhm.
So I was kind of working with my therapist at the time of like I had a as a three does, I had built my persona around not being college educated. And I was like, you don't need
Oh,
college. Like, yeah.
that's fascinating. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
good.
yeah,
Uh-huh.
yeah. So I was like, I'm better than that. Like, I don't need college, like I'm good, like I'm
Oh,
smart.
that's good. Yeah.
And so kind of breaking down the fact that like, no, I do want to go to college now. And now this is like a different part of me that I hadn't like learned about. Um,
I just want to stop just 1 second. I'm smiling because that is such an interesting thing about threes. It's like, oh man, like just how how every decision has to be rationalized within your self-concept
yes.
and
Yes.
and
So
and
much
also
freaking work.
and also your self-concept has to be superior to whatever you're comparing it to.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
like no, I haven't gone to college. No, college, like people go to college or dorks or like what or
Yeah,
whatever.
exactly.
Like, like
Like I don't need it. I'm above capitalism. Like fuck that.
yes. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So that's amazing. So your choice to go to college had to basically like you had to reconstitute your identity to fit that in.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
And one nice thing that comes with growing older as a three is realizing that we are all very dynamic humans, and like you can want different things than maybe your persona would allow, right?
You can. You can? What?
I know it's mind blowing. It's mind blowing, but you can.
Uh,
I'm here to tell you. So yeah, it's that is a constant struggle with me of like being able to like make myself seem like this put together person, but also be like, I've lived 15 lives. Like,
mhm.
nah. Um so yeah, anyway, not being perceived as flaky is a whole thing. It's a whole thing,
Yep.
Josh. Um so yeah, so I had to basically like break down my persona of myself to like fit this in. Like when you like set up a bookshelf, but now you get a new book. Now you have to put it somewhere. Anyway, that's what I had to do. Um, so I started going back to school because we had planned to move to the Netherlands, and um, obviously they were not going to accept my high school degree um, in colleges over there. So,
Mhm.
and fun fact about me, I actually went to a non-accredited high school, so I technically don't have a high school degree.
Uh-huh.
Christian high school kids, am I right?
So
So
wait, but you wanted to go to the Netherlands. The Netherlands was just like a place you wanted to live, period, full stop,
right,
with Brian, right?
right. Yeah,
Yeah.
the Netherlands was
Yeah.
it was had the most pros. Like we wanted to live in Europe, but
Mhm.
Netherlands had the most
Okay,
pros.
check. Yeah.
But what I didn't realize is the Netherlands schools are either the best in the world and you cannot get into them, or they're shit and there's no in between. And I went to the one that is shit and didn't know. Anyway, super fun times. So I started going back to school to get an associate so that they would accept me basically into college over there, into
Mhm.
uni. Um, and I went for just business because I thought I wanted to do like some form of like event coordinating. Because just wasn't sure. Like it just sounded fun. So I was like, sure.
Mhm.
As I went through my business degree, I realized that is like not my vibe. Um, I had not come into like my fully introverted self yet, I would say.
Okay.
And through college, COVID hit, right? And I realized that I was like, oh, I am a true introvert. I can sit alone in a room for like 6 days and I love it. So um I realized that I probably have autism, realized that I cannot function at a high level in very social settings for a long time.
Mhm.
So I realized kind of my limitations there. Um, and so that's when I kind of realized that event management and like anything having to do with like contact with humans is probably not my thing.
Mhm.
So I kind of took a couple electives because it's an associate. So I was already like deep into it. Like once I realized this, and you can't really change your degree in associates, like it's too fast. Um, so I took some electives that were things I was interested in. So like psychology and microbiology.
Mhm.
And I loved microbiology. It was so fun. Like every class, I was just like eating it up. I was reading the textbook, which like who reads a fucking textbook in an
Yeah.
associate's degree? Um, I listened to podcasts. Like I listened to a podcast called Genetics Unzipped, and I'm like, every new episode that comes out, I'm like, oh, what are they talking about? And it's just shit that I like don't really understand, but I like love it. I've listened to the book. Well, it's like a series of lectures called The Theory of Everything. It's physics. I don't know I don't understand physics, but I love it. So, like that's where I started realizing like my little science brain had never been fed as a child because I was taught creationism. And then was kind of talking to some friends about it. I was talking to like I want to do science, but I don't know what. And one of my friends' dads is a geneticist, I think. He's some form of like breeding PhD animal stuff. So he was like, I have a lab. I work with specifically food animals, in this case, sheep. Um, Come watch what I do. And I was like, okay. So I shadowed him for a day, got to see his lab, got to see how he collects semen, which is super entertaining. Not because I got to watch semen collection, but because his system was funny. He literally like to clarify. Uh, he had to he had to create sheep fleshlights. Like it was a whole thing. It was so funny. He had like these
Okay.
PVC pipes with like rubber condoms in them, but they have to be pumped full of warm water so that it actually feels like,
Wow.
a vagina, a
Yeah, yeah.
vaginal cavity. And then I got to see like all these pictures of sperm under a microscope, and he was like, "Yeah, I actually castrated like one of these sheep." And then we tested his semen, and there was one sperm in it going around and around in circles. Like it didn't have good motility, but it was there. And he was like so proud of himself because it's also very hard to find sperm under a microscope. Like that was crazy chances.
Okay.
so
Yeah.
so anyway, he was very excited about it. And it was me, and he's very German. So like it was me and this old German guy discussing sheep sperm for like all day.
Mhm.
Um it was so fun. It was the most fun I've had in a, a long time. So
Yeah.
that's when I kind of realized that I wanted to do genetics or genome something, but in animals, not in humans. I don't human genetics is not my thing. So
Yeah. So this is really cool and interesting to me from a three point of view because, and this I think is what I was trying to set up, is that previously you were building your identity based on things that you felt you were good at. Like you discovered, oh, I'm really good at selling knives, or I'm really good at like making old white men like me, or whatever. And you're like, just hearing you talk about genetics, just like the quality of your storytelling, like you were so lit up just talking about it.
yeah.
And you know what I mean? And that feels to me like the heart shine of the three, and it's
Hmm.
like, it's not the polish, it's like the
No.
actual glow. And it's coming from a different place. It's like,
Hmm.
it's actually not a competence place to start. It's like I was hearing you say that you're listening to these podcasts, you don't actually even understand what they're saying. It's not like you're not leading with, "Oh, I'm really good at this." You're
No.
leading with
In
like,
fact, I'm really
"I
bad
just."
at it.
Yeah, yeah. You're leading with, "I just am really fascinated by this and I really like it." Period.
Hmm.
And that's the thread that you're following now. And I imagine three competence stuff will eventually show up and that
Oh, it
you'll,
definitely does.
yeah, get good at it and stuff like that. But um just because it lights you up, that's the reason now that you're going after it. So that feels
Yeah.
really cool.
It is. And I think the blessing of the three is having the confidence to go after something that I don't think I'm particularly good at, sciences.
Hmm.
Um, but that three, like, cockiness where you're like, I can do anything.
Yeah, totally.
Like, like I don't think most
uh,
people would go after a degree where they're like, I am not good at like I'm not good at this, but I'm gonna go after it because I know if I work hard enough, it'll probably work out for me. Which is
that's
like
great.
that cocky three shit where you're just like, sure, I can scuba dive to the bottom of the ocean. Totally.
You're talking to the guy who taught himself piano at 24 and became a
Exactly.
professional. Yeah, so yeah, that's
Yeah, yeah,
that's I'm very familiar with that space. Yeah.
yeah. You're like, I can. Totally.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, okay, so I'm noticing the time and let's wrap up here, but
Okay.
this is amazing. And also I'm so glad that we came full circle to your time in the Netherlands. So that's where you are now, is like you went to school, basically like da 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 da, went out there
This
and
is the thing.
and here you are back in Virginia,
It was not the
regrouping.
thing.
Yeah. And I'm I will restrain myself from asking you what your next steps are, because maybe are you're I imagine you're just figuring it out, like you're not sure yet.
You think I don't have a plan, bitch? Like, come on.
You got one?
Oh yeah. I had a plan from the moment that I knew I wasn't going to continue with this school. I was like, all right, let's go. Um, I've
This is
already like,
probably 6 fixed second
oh,
as opposed to last, because I'm 396. And
oh, that's interesting.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And I definitely experience, I mean, your quality of energy is feels to me 6 second as opposed to last.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I definitely have a very strong connection to six. But yeah,
Mm.
when plans fall through, I don't immediately mourn them. I fix this scenario and
Mm-hmm.
then I mourn them.
Mm.
So I had to come up with like, what am I going to do now? So I have already applied to colleges here in the States. I'm transferring my credits. I'm probably going to go to ASU online because they have a biology program online. All this stuff. I get it. like making sure that I get enough lab hours. Like I probably
Hmm.
start in like March, I think.
Hmm.
We're job searching, got an apartment, bing bang boom, all that kind of stuff.
Cool. Okay.
Um, yeah, yeah, that's the
Well,
plan.
good luck with all that.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, how are you feeling, and what has this been like for you?
Um, it's been really fun. It's been a less heavy than our first call. It was it was a lot more like bouncing around and kind of having fun with the topic, so that's kind of cool. I like that you contextualize like everything I said in threeness. It was interesting to me because I often don't do that because, like you said, I think of my three as secondary to like my weird brain shit.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I always am entertained by people like being like, "Oh, so this might be your three coming through." I'm like, "Oh yeah, it might be." Like,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
so so that was really fun to like listen to you mansplain myself to me. So thanks for that.
You're so welcome. I'm happy to mansplain anything you want anytime.
I know. Well, you're our white guy. I mean, what are you gonna do?
That's right. Okay. Well, great. Thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate
Of
it.
course.
And this
Yeah,
has
it was
been
my
really fun.
pleasure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.